While you're completing your estimate, EstimatorXpress automatically creates a professional and detailed customer quotation which can be tailored to suit your business. You can insert your company logo, edit the introductory letter, and choose exactly what you want to show in the quote. In this video, I'll show you around the quote settings and explain how to set up the quote so it's presented exactly the way you want. Before you open the quote, it's a good idea to complete the client and site address details and to check your profit and inflation rates from the job settings. Click Job Settings on the navigator. From here, you can access several aspects of the job settings. Click View and edit contact and address information to update the client and site address details. Fill out the client address details as appropriate. For an extension or renovation job, you can tick this box to show that the client address and the site address are the same. Now click Overhead, Profit and Inflation on the navigator. Adjust the overhead and profit percentages as required. I'm going to add an overhead of 15% to the subcontractors, as they require some managing, which has an associated cost. Next, review and edit the inflation rates. You can also set the delay before inflation is applied. Currently it's set to 12 weeks, or around 3 months, but you can change it if needed. Once you're happy with those details, click Outputs on the navigator. From this screen you can see a complete list of all the outputs available, including the written quote, data reports and graphical reports. Click the Open button next to Quote for Main Estimate to open the customer quotation. A preview of the quote appears in the middle of your screen. You'll see that Quote for Main Estimate is highlighted in blue on the navigator. You are currently viewing a preview of the whole quote. You can zoom in and out of the quote using the buttons on the ribbon at the top of the screen. Alternatively, you can hold down the Control key on your keyboard and use the scroll wheel of your mouse to zoom in and out. Scrolling towards the screen will zoom in, and scrolling away from the screen will zoom out. You can also use the Next and Previous Page buttons to navigate your way around the document. When you first open the quote, on the right hand side of the quote you can see the main settings. From here you can change a number of the main quote settings. Firstly, you can decide which quote type you want to use. This drop-down box controls whether the resources are grouped by build phase, estimating calculator or location. For extensions and new builds, you'll probably find the build phase option is most suitable. For renovation work, you may find it more appropriate to use the estimating calculator or location option. Take a look at the different ways of organising the quote and see which one works best for your job. Next, you can decide which resource types you want to include in the quote. For example, you can create a labour-only quote by only ticking the labour resources. For this quote, I'm going to show all resource types. The contents tick boxes allow you to decide which sections of the quote to include. For example, if you untick the Show Cover Page tick box, it will not be displayed in the quote. To see your changes in the preview, click the Apply Changes button. I'm going to switch that back on for now. Next, you can decide whether to add inflation to the quote. Inflation is the general increase in prices which often needs to be applied to building materials and also skilled labour and plant hire and so on. This needs to be applied progressively over time. If you're quoting for a job which is starting in a few months' time, or the job is likely to take several months to complete, inflation will come into play. If you don't factor inflation into your quote and prices increase by say 5% over the course of the job, this will have a significant impact on your profits. You'll recall that you can set the job inflation rates from the job settings. I'm going to include inflation in this quote. Here you can set the VAT rate. By default, EstimatorXpress will add 20% VAT to the quote as a whole, but this figure can be changed to a different percentage if VAT rates change, or to a fixed amount for different classifications of building work as appropriate, for example new build or listed buildings. If you are not VAT registered, you can use the Input Only option for VAT. This option will add VAT onto the resources you pay for, such as materials and some of your VAT registered subcontract companies, as per the price book VAT rates. With the Input Only option for VAT, EstimatorXpress will not apply VAT to the quote as a whole. This is because as a non-VAT registered company, the VAT becomes an actual cost to your business as it is non-reclaimable. From the main Settings tab, you can also change the quote font settings. On the navigator on the left, you can navigate your way around the different sections of the quote. From within each section, you can review and edit the settings for that particular section. Click on the cover page on the navigator. On the right hand side, we can now see the cover page settings. You can see from the preview that a job description and the client and site address details appear by default on the cover page. However, you can overtype the text, including the keywords if desired, to update the text in the cover page. For example, I'm going to change the job description. Don't forget to click Apply Changes to see your changes in the preview. You can of course insert your company logo onto the cover page. Tick the Include Logo tick box, and then click Browse. Locate your company logo image file, click on it to select it, and click Open. Use the horizontal and vertical alignment boxes to position the logo on the cover page. You can rescale the image using the size box. Increase the number to make the image larger, or decrease the number to make the image smaller. And don't forget to click Apply Changes to see what it looks like. Now let's take a look at the letter. Click on the letter on the navigator. On the quote settings pane on the right hand side, you can now see the letter settings. As with the cover page, you can edit the text for the letter template. You can select a different letter template from the drop-down box. We've provided a range of template letters, but you can create your own templates by clicking Copy. The selected template will be copied. Type in a name for the template and click OK. Then edit the text in the text box. Alternatively, you can copy and paste your own standard letter into the text box. Open your company letter, copy the contents by pressing the Ctrl and C keys on your keyboard, return to EstimatorXpress, highlight the text, and then press the Ctrl and V keys on your keyboard. This will paste your text into the text box. Check you're happy with the formatting. And then click Save. This will save your letter template to the library so that you can use it in other jobs. In the same way that you imported your company logo, you can import your company letterhead into the letter. Tick the Include Letterhead tick box and then browse your computer for your company letterhead image file. Now let's take a look at the Assumptions and Omissions section of the quote. Click Assumptions and Omissions on the navigator. On the quote settings pane, you can edit the introductory sentence for assumptions in the top text box. If you want to change the way the assumptions themselves appear, you can do that from the main estimate or the main quote template. You can also change the introductory sentence for the omissions. Again, if you want to change the wording of the omission, go back to the main estimate or the quote template and do it there. Now let's take a look at the provisional sums. Click Provisional Sums on the navigator. In a similar way, you can edit the introductory sentence for the provisional sums. If you want to change the way the provisional sum itself appears, you can do that from the main estimate or the quote template. Moving on to the summary, there's only one setting here. You can decide whether or not you want to show the build phase totals in the summary. I'm going to leave those switched on for now. Now let's have a look at the breakdown section. Click Breakdown on the navigator. On the quote settings pane, we now have a Build Phases tab. This tab controls the way all of the build phases appear in the quote. You can use this tick box to show or hide the introductory paragraph. You can change the wording of the paragraph by typing into this text box. Next, you can decide whether to show the build phase pictures and the build phase description. It's always useful to have the images in place when you're doing domestic work. You can decide whether or not to show the total cost for each build phase, and you can decide whether to start each new build phase on its own new page. Next, you can decide which build phases you want to itemise in the quote. If you untick a build phase, the costs will still be included in the quote, but will be grouped into the additional charges section. There are many different options in the build phases options, so scroll down to see more. Here you can decide how much detail you'd like to show in the quote. You can hide all the resources, show just the key resources, or show all resources. Next, you can choose whether you want to itemise the different resource types. So at the moment it's set to only show material resources, but you can show all resource types. Click Apply Changes to see what it looks like in the preview. You can also decide whether to show resource quantities. This provides quite a detailed quote. There's also an option to use friendly names. These are generic product descriptions which are more meaningful to the layman. You can decide whether you want to show subtotals for each type of resource. Scroll down the preview to see the different build phases. You can scroll down by using the scroll wheel on your mouse, or by using the scroll bar which appears when your mouse is over the preview pane. If you click on the individual build phases on the navigator, you can fine-tune the options for each build phase. Let's take a look at the masonry shell. A tab with settings for the masonry shell appears on the quote settings pane. You can decide whether you want to include the image and the description for this particular build phase. If you wanted to, you could even select your own image to use for this build phase. If you do want to display the build phase description, you can edit the text here if needed. Type into the text box to make the changes, and then click the Save button to save the paragraph for use in other jobs. Finally, you can decide which particular resources you want to display in the quote. Any items you untick will still be factored into the quote cost, but will not be itemised in the quote. Towards the end of the quote, you'll find the acceptance forms. Click Acceptance on the navigator. On the acceptance settings, you can choose how many copies of the acceptance forms you'd like to appear in the quote. The default is 2, one for you and one for the customer to keep. You can overtype the text, including any of the references as needed. The final section of the quote is the Terms and Conditions. Click Terms and Conditions on the navigator. If you want to use this section for something else, you can. Simply change the title in the first text box. You can also copy and paste a block of text into the text box. As per the instruction, you can copy the text from another document, click into the text box, and then press the Ctrl and V keys on your keyboard to paste the text into the box. So this could be for terms and conditions, or it could be for anything else you'd like to put at the end of your quote. As in many other areas of the quote settings, you can insert a keyword into the box by selecting one from the drop-down box. To preview the whole quote, click Quote for Main Estimate on the navigator. Then you can scroll down through the whole document. Remember, you can use your scroll wheel to do that, or you can use the scroll bar which appears on the right hand side when your cursor's over the preview. Once you're happy with the presentation of your quote, click Print on the ribbon at the top of the screen. Alternatively, you can export your quote, for example to email to your client. Of course, once you've got your quote set up just the way you want it, you can save the settings to use in other jobs. Click the Save to the Library button on the ribbon at the top of the screen. Specify which settings you want to save, or you can leave them all selected. Then click OK. Any new jobs you create will automatically use these saved settings. To apply these settings to other existing jobs, open up that job, then click the Import from the Library button on the ribbon at the top of the quote screen. So there it is. That's how to create a professional looking quote presented just the way you want it. Don't forget to save your quote settings for use in other jobs once you're happy with them. Over to you.